In this video, I'm going to break down all the different elements that are present in the jazz language known as bebop, and how you can start incorporating those individual elements into your playing. Most wind players fail to do this for one simple reason, and it's because they're just thinking, I want to play bebop, which is way too big of a statement, right? It's like saying, I want to be good at my instrument, which of course you do, but what does good actually mean, and what does it actually mean to play bebop? So in reality, this jazz language of bebop has many different components that you should be tackling one at a time instead of all together all at once. So I'm going to break down bebop into 3 parts here that you can practice individually so that over time you can actually see some progress day to day instead of being overwhelmed by this huge undertaking that is the bebop genre or the bebop language. Now, you're probably thinking, who the heck is this guy and why should I listen to him about bebop? My name is Michael, and I'm a gigging saxophonist and improvisation coach with over 10 years of playing and teaching experience. I lead my own bands, I've put out 4 records as a leader of my own music, and I play in other musicians' jazz ensembles as well, usually around Chicago, which is where I live. Over the years, and still today, I still practice elements of the bebop language to improve my own playing, and you might be surprised that my goal is not to sound exactly like Charlie Parker, but it's actually to sound like myself, using elements of what my favorite players, like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Lee Konitz, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, countless other players, have laid out for me, have laid out for all of us in their recorded music. So there are 3 individual parts of bebop, and I'm going to show you what they are and how you can start practicing them in order to take your playing to the next level step by step. Part 1 that I want to address is your time feel, specifically your 8th note feel, okay? The reason that the bebop language sounds different than the swing genre that came before it is because of how these players were experiencing time and feel. The swing feel is actually different. It's still swinging, but bebop is traditionally a faster language. That's one element of it, is that you're playing faster tempos. And Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie's 8th notes felt a certain way, okay? They didn't swing as hard necessarily as like swing players of the 1920s, but they certainly swung, and it just had a certain bouncy feel to it, okay? So practicing your personal 8th note feel along with recordings or play along tracks, backing tracks of just drums or drums and bass is going to be the first step here. And a great way to do that is just by practicing your scales. There are things called bebop scales that won't teach you exactly how to play bebop, but I do have another video on bebop scales that you should definitely check out. And the reason they work so well is because they add an element of chromaticism that allows scales to fit into a bar of 4/4 time very well, okay? You can fit 8 eighth notes into a bar of 4/4 time, and that extra chromatic note makes it fit really well. So that's one way you can practice making your 8th notes feel more like a bebop player's 8th notes. Articulation is a part of this as well, and a lot of saxophone players specifically, but this can work for any instrumentalist. Saxophone players talk a lot about ghosting notes, or I've heard the term duden-tonguing or doodle-tonguing. Doodle-tonguing is more for brass players. Duden-tonguing is more for like muting the reed if you're a saxophone or I guess clarinet player too. These are all just ways to articulate when you can still hear all of the notes, but some of them have more importance than others. And I want to be careful talking about this because I just want to let you know, don't let anybody tell you that there's only one way to do this. George Garzone, one of my favorite saxophone players and pedagogues, slurs almost everything and lets all the time exist in his fingers. He only articulates for emphasis, which I think is probably the biggest part of the bebop language. When you hear like a big jump, like a jump of a 4th or a 5th, then you're probably tonguing the higher note, the note that you're jumping to, in order to get an emphasized moment in the music. So all to say, articulation is a huge part of this time feel, rhythm feel, but there are multiple ways to do it, and the biggest way to actually incorporate this time and articulation into your playing is just to listen to all these bebop tunes, all these bebop records, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, even going a little bit further into like the hard bop language where you're hearing players like Cannonball Adderley, Sonny Rollins, Sonny Stitt, and pretty much anything that came after the bebop language can all give you a glimpse of what kind of articulations you can use to make your eighth notes feel like bebop. So that covers part one: rhythm, time, eighth note feel, and articulation. Notice I haven't talked at all about what notes to play quite yet, because that's a separate element. The most important element, I think, of any musical genre is the rhythmic language. But now let's move on to part two here, which does involve melody and specifically chromaticism. Okay, so maybe the part of the bebop language that players gravitate to the most first is the chromaticism that exists here. Okay, there is so much chromaticism going on in the bebop language, but it's important to remember that the most consonant notes, the chord tones, and the notes that exist in the key are all still there. There are just chromatic notes in between. There are things like enclosures, chromatic passing tones that became more heavily used by players like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. So ways to incorporate this into your playing are through chromatic exercises, like taking a triad and doing chromatic approaches or chromatic enclosures around each note of the triad. So let's say you're in the key of C, you can practice approaching the notes from the C major triad, like B to C, F sharp to G, D sharp to E. Those are your chromatic approach notes, and then you can add more chromatic approach notes targeting the consonant notes, again, the chord tones, okay? The other surefire way to start to hear and understand the melodic approach and the chromaticism that exists in bebop is just through listening. Again, listening is always the key, but by practicing the heads, okay? So the Charlie Parker Omnibook has to be one of the best-selling jazz books of all time. It's all of the bebop heads that Charlie Parker played and his solo transcriptions as well. But before even getting to the solo transcriptions, just learn the heads really, really well. Again, make them feel like the recordings. Be able to, after you've practiced them slowly to work out all the technical stuff, be able to play them with the recordings, okay? And that's also going to get your technique and your ear in tune with the kind of melodies and the kind of chromaticism that exists within the bebop language. So that covers part two, the melodic and chromatic aspect of the bebop language, and you get that from chromatic approaches, chromatic exercises, of which I have a few that I'll link below here, and heads. Okay, and part three here has to do with harmony and form, which I think go together, and I have lots of ways of practicing these individual elements as well. So first, let's talk about the harmony. Most bebop tunes that Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie played are what we call contrafacts. And a contrafact is an existing set of chord changes, an existing form, with a new melody written on top of it. So, for example, Charlie Parker's tune Ornithology came from the Great American Songbook tune, also known as a show tune, called How High the Moon. Okay, so How High the Moon is the original tune. Charlie Parker wrote a new melody on top of that, and that new melody was very bebop-y in language. So again, learning these melodies is going to be really important, but the harmony actually comes from even older harmony than what we're looking at in the 1940s. It comes from like the 1920s and 30s. So how to practice that harmony is going to start with just kind of learning the bass motion, okay? So you can literally, whatever instrument you're playing, you can just play the bass notes in time throughout the form, and then you can kind of flesh out each chord. So first chord of How High the Moon is G major 7. You can just play G, B, D, F sharp of that chord, and then the next chord that happens in measure 3 is G, B flat, D, F, G minor 7, okay? Don't want to get too in the weeds here. The point is you're taking each element of the harmony, each chord, and learning to describe it on your instrument, whether you're playing saxophone, trumpet, piano, bass, guitar, what have you. Play it full range on your instrument and gain some flexibility with that sound. I've heard a lot in the past that bebop is a lot of arpeggios up and scales down. That's a good exercise to practice. So that's how to practice some harmony on your instrument, and by doing that, hopefully you'll also be practicing the form. There are a lot of 12 bar, 16 bar, and 32 bar forms that exist in the bebop language, again, because we're taking these forms that came from Great American Songbook tunes, so you're looking at a lot of very standard song forms. When you're practicing harmony, you should also really be doing it in time so that you're internalizing, really like the word internalize instead of memorize, you're internalizing the form here. So that is the third element of the bebop language. Notice we just went through the three main elements of music: rhythm, melody, and harmony, okay? But there are specific ways that those three things are laid out within the bebop language. So basically, I want to have you simplify everything so that you're not overwhelmed by this very distinct language that is bebop, okay? So hopefully this was helpful. Don't forget to give a like and a subscribe if it was, so that you can find some more of my videos. I have more videos on my page giving specific exercises for some of these things, so I hope you'll check those out. And if you're ready to take things even further, there's a link below to book a call with me so that I can build out a personalized plan for you and see if my improvisation coaching program would be something that's right for you and something that could work for you. So hope you liked this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.